Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Co-host Rich Gear here. We're here as well. And Doug, you just recently got done a three-week whirlwind tour of all.
2 weeks.
Was it 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
Felt like
yes.
3. See, I missed them already. You know. Now, how many countries did you go to, Doug?
Well, it was 5 countries. We started out in the Netherlands,
Right.
and then sailed on the Rhine River through Germany,
Right.
and then went to Austria, and then during the night we went through Slovakia, and I didn't notice that on the first time we went this tour because I think it went in the wee hours of the night.
Oh, okay.
But we did see the city skyline of Bratislava or something like that. It was the capital of the country. And then we ended up in Budapest, Hungary.
Okay.
And so there is, this was on a Viking River cruise, so it was a grand European tour, and we saw quite a number of different things, a lot of castles and different...
you can't go to Germany without seeing castles.
Right.
I've got to get over there one of these days. My son's in-laws are native German, and I've been wanting. They've been over here several times, and I've not yet got over there. But long and short of it, Doug, we're going to talk about something that we have not really talked about ever, and kind of interesting. I didn't even know about some of this stuff. Yeah. The witch trials in Germany or
in Germany.
So there was some in France, I understand.
Yeah.
As well, but it was in hysteria. And there were 4 major ones they talked about in these articles that I read over, and we're going to talk about a couple of them: Bamberg and Würzburg, or what's it?
Würzburg, yeah.
Würzburg, yeah. So, what did you?
We visited Würzburg first, and then Bamberg next.
Okay.
And you have to understand that at this time, this was something that was part of the Holy Roman Empire, and you had an emperor, which. I don't think it was the Habsburgs at this time, but it was each of the Pope would appoint a prince bishop,
right.
Which not only had the clerical power, but they also had the political power.
Well, the Holy Roman Emperor, the first one I think was Charlemagne, wasn't he? The first one.
Right, he was.
Yeah, he was appointed by the Pope, and it was in gratitude because they stopped the Islamic invasion of Europe.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. His father or grandfather, I can't remember, and he continued that, and so they set up an empire, kind of like after the Roman Empire, and that's what they did. And so this is many hundreds of years after that, because that was what. 1100, 800, I'm not sure.
I think it was 900.
900, yeah. And so this is what, you're talking about these trials, we're going to talk about in a few minutes. We're in the 1500s, 1600s?
In the 1600s, the one in Bamberg, which is actually went on a special tour, and that took us to the Franconian countryside.
Okay.
And the prince bishops, and the dates of this was 1626 to 1632, where these trials were taking place.
Okay.
And the prince bishops, had these big palaces. I'm going to show you some of these big palaces because they were pretty opulent. Yeah. Not only having the spiritual power, but the political power. They pretty much took over.
They ruled the roost.
The roost, yeah.
All right.
And so then, what was going on was, and the tour that I had of Franconian countryside was at Bamberg. Bamberg is a place that we stopped on the way over there, and I didn't find the town itself all that particularly interesting the first time that we went last year. And so I said,
so this your second time?
Yeah, this is our second time we went to this particular grand European tour.
Okay.
And so I said, I'm going to sign up for this optional tour and take it, and they took us out on the bus into the country. And I thought actually the tour itself was a little disappointing, except I did pick up this information about these witch trials that were taking place. They took us to the actual spot where the trials took place. And this was actually outside of Bamberg, and we also went to the Prince Bishop's Palace. But there's a little town nearby, and they had all these half-timbered houses, where you have all this unique German architecture, where they have all these timbers going every which way, you know, and cross.
Like wooden stuff?
Wooden stuff, yeah. It'd be the stone on the bottom, and then the timbers were on the top.
Okay.
And what was interesting is that they did things based upon, they were taxed on the size of the foundation of the house. And so the foundations of the house were little, but they would build them out. So they were kind of larger on the top. So it was a weird construction. But anyway, in Ziel, Z-I-E-L is the name of the town.
Okay.
That's where a lot of these people were actually burned at the stake.
Yeah, they were burned at the stake, and I was reading some of the letters. The hysteria of it was unbelievable. But you and I talked earlier, and I've read some things over the years. Some of the people, or some of the stuff that got accredited to witchcraft or satanic liaisons or whatever, was they were having bad crops and bad harvests and all kinds of stuff like that. And that kind of set up an attitude of fear and worry, and they were looking for something to blame.
Right.
And so, you know, of course, years later, you know, it makes the Christians look pretty silly, you know, because I've read, again, this is hindsight, so how do you know for sure, but it seemed pretty credible. But a lot of it was because it was a little mini ice age during this particular time. They got dank and cold during this particular time. The 1600s, it got kind of cold. Really, it was 1600s through the 70s, or 15 to the 1700s.
Right.
It kind of got cold, really cold, and a lot of bacteria or funguses or something got in some of the crops and some of the plants. I mean, I can't tell you. I remember seeing this on some Discovery Channel thing, and it ties into what you were talking about there, because this article talked about some of that idea. But Doug, you know, we make a big deal about the Salem witch trials here in America.
Oh yeah.
And there might have been, what, 15 people at the most? Or, I mean, how many people actually lost their lives?
I think it was over 30 or something.
Was it that many? I didn't think it was that many. But
in this case...
You're talking hundreds.
Well, about almost 1,000 people lost their lives during these trials. And here's what was going on, is that there was actually a theologian. His name was Friedrich Forner, and he was bringing up the justification for these trials, because what he was, and you have to keep in mind, back in this time, the Bible had only been printed in German or and later in English for just a very short period of time.
Yeah, the only Bibles you had for 1,000 years were really in Latin.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the which is interesting when you think about the history of that. It's a little segue there, but Jerome translated it, called the Vulgate, which meant the vulgar tongue. Okay, he was meant to do something so that, because everybody spoke Latin, but then the Catholic Church made it only Latin, and nobody could. After 1,000 years later, hardly anybody was reading Latin like that anymore.
Right.
And it was like High Latin, and it was the. But he meant to translate it into the common tongue so that everybody could get the Bible. Well, they sure stopped that idea. Of course, might have been a lot of it because a lot of the stuff they were doing was really not biblical at all. But that's
the whole thing.
That's the whole thing. Yeah.
And if you visit these bishops' palaces, what they had out in their gardens and everything like that were statues of the Greek gods.
Oh yeah.
And so there was also all this idolatry, overt idolatry, that they were promoting because of the art, presumably.
Yeah.
But
paganism was big.
But it was they were actually not really that interested in following the letter of what the Bible was really saying.
Well, and of course a lot of them probably didn't even know it.
And so they were trying to figure out what Christianity was all about, and they were blowing it, really. They're not modeling what Christianity. And this is the point, is that things like these witch trials always come up as a apologetic against Christianity.
I know.
And they say, well, you see, these Christians, they went on these crazy escapades and killed all these people.
Well, there's a biblical Old Testament law. You should not suffer a witch to live. Isn't there something about the Old Testament about that? But in the Old Testament, those earlier times, there were people that really were leading the Israelites away from Yahweh, leading them away from God, and that was a blasphemy. Whether they had supernatural powers or not was pretty much beside the point. God was overtly supernatural, especially at the time of the Exodus and those kinds of areas. But that Old Testament law, did they use that to justify some of their stuff? They did, but they were accusing all kinds of people of witchcraft that had nothing. It was like a lot of it seemed like it was more like family feuds or political agendas.
Actually, the justice system wasn't really non-existent or broken.
Yeah, if you tortured and confessed, you were killed.
Yeah. And if you get tortured, I guess there was only one person who survived the tortures, and finally, they let him go. But
really,
but the rest of them, if you were accused, and people, if they were in the if you have a family feud and somebody didn't like somebody, they could accuse you of being a witch. They'd bring you to trial, and the trial was the torture and the thumb screws. Started out with thumb screws, and then actual burnings. And the theology of this was that if you actually burned the witch, then there was nothing that the demon could come back into. So that they wanted to get rid of the whole thing. And
the thing is,
and they had this crematorium in Zeal where they did the burnings. It's really horrifying to hear these stories.
Well, the thing about it gets me though is we justifiably are horrified and think these people were really despicable that did this. But what really amazes me is how people who are doing similar kinds of things even today with a modern sensibility never put it together that it has to do with the human condition.
Right.
When you're not really living biblical things, you can make any excuse you want to make somebody else be inferior. We isolate and justify things to get people down, and I see this all the time. I mean, the hysteria. I still remember years ago. We laughed about the War of the Worlds thing, where people jumped out of buildings, they killed themselves. They're mass hysteria, panicking because they thought the aliens were landing, and they were laughing. I says, well, if somebody told you the communists had landed in New Jersey and were attacking, people would believe that too. I mean, the information is a little bit more easily gotten than it was. But what I'm getting at is that the justification is always made for its day. In those days, the biblical or the worldview was more Christian, if you will, or at least ostensibly Christian. As you mentioned, the people who were setting up some of these things were idolaters and worshiping, or at least paganism was epidemic, in these kinds of things, and the masses were ignorant of the Bible by and large. They hadn't been able to really read it. They had to have it interpreted by the priests for 1,000 years. Up until even the 1800s, the Pope was calling Bible societies anathema. The Catholics never liked the Bible back in the day. It's hard if you got Catholics out there, it's hard for you to recognize that. But most of you read history, it's pretty reprehensible. Okay, so that being said, there was a culture of ignorance. It had ostensibly a theological culture, okay, and you also had some bad circumstances happening, bad crops, the weather was getting cold, and if suddenly
they wanted something to blame it on.
They wanted something to blame on. Yeah, they wanted something.
And so the people were calling upon the Prince Bishop to do something, and they were asking him to find out why they were why God was not smiling on them. And so they blamed it on the witchcraft. Now, there obviously was witchcraft going on.
Yeah.
That was something that was unmistakable. But that's beside the point. What happened was then you had a lot of innocent people being accused. one of the things that happened once they finally got people to confess and to end their torture, they said, well, we'll give you a mercy killing by having your head cut off first before you get burned.
Oh yeah, chop their head off first. Yeah. Okay.
And so that's the mercy. And so, but they would say, now what we need you to do is to tell us who else was involved in your witchcraft.
Yeah.
And then they would continue the torture until they got those confessions. And so that was something that really fueled additional executions. And finally it came to the point where people realized that everybody was in danger of getting accused of being a witch.
That's the way to stop these things. Now, Doug, this reminds you, they make a big deal, the Hollywood 10, the people, the communists. The fact of the matter, there really were communists. But innocent people were getting branded, and the demagoguery that comes in. And of course now anybody tries to say there were no communists. You just mentioned there was actually witchcraft going on. I wasn't aware of that, so it doesn't surprise me any. So probably really was stuff going on. But Christians, by and large, we're not under Old Testament law in the sense where you physically have to burn people at the stake. But the Catholic Church, again, during the Inquisitions and other things, had been burning people at the stake for heresy. And of course, they were fighting the Reformation too at the same time. This was going on at the same time, and so they were having battles back and forth, and it was a very, very troubled time. But again, people, there's all kinds of things that, if you're not PC today, that's our secular culture. They don't burn you at the stake anymore, but they'll ostracize you.
So there were people who were even the people who were the mayor of the city was accused of being a witch.
Yeah, didn't the wife of the mayor, one of the cities, she actually got executed, burned at the stake. That's the thing. We're not to the point where we burn people at the stake anymore. But man, we do whatever we can to isolate and ostracise and stigmatize people who don't fit in the normal things. We run into it, Doug, as creationists.
Right.
We know that. It's from the scientific.
Now, in the Würzburg
so we talked about the Bamberg. Now we're into Würzburg now?
Yeah, Würzburg. I got a picture of this church
and that's where the fires or the burnings took place, or the trials?
The trials took place. Actually, the burning outside this church is where the burnings were taking place.
Is that okay? Yeah, and you saw that?
I saw saw that place.
Yeah.
And it's actually I got a picture of a fresco that's on this church, and it showed a God sitting up there with it looked like a little pipe coming down from his mouth to the Virgin Mary, and there was actually a little baby on this pipe that he was doing the Immaculate Conception. So
what?
It was the goofiest looking thing I ever saw. Yeah. And the angel was talking to the Virgin Mary, and God was sitting up on his throne with his little pipe doing the Immaculate Conception. So, I got a picture of that. So
obviously, that's the Immaculate Conception. Obviously, that's because it's a Catholic area of the thing. But what I was astounded at, Doug, when I was reading the article, is you had 3- and 4-year-olds getting executed.
That's strange.
7-year-olds were getting burned at the stake. And there was one, a beautiful young girl. She was 19 years old. She was burned at the stake. And said she was and the description of her, she was, now granted, this could be a PR thing too. It said she was of utmost morality and purity and sweet disposition. And boy, somebody accused her, and she was done. I mean, and I don't know if that was at Würzburg or Bamberg, but it was. But this one had even more people die here. Bamberg there was documented 157. They said something like upwards of 200-300 people at Bamberg. This one was like what, 900? I mean, it was way up there.
Really bad.
Hundreds of them.
And the Prince Bishop's Palace at Würzburg was so opulent. Thousands of rooms and and then the big they wouldn't let you take pictures inside, but up on the ceiling there was actually a fresco that was painted of the 4 different continents, and you had 4 continents. They had Asia, Africa, Europe, and America. They didn't know about South America yet.
Okay.
But Africa and America were just primitive.
Yeah.
Because this is the 1600s, 1700s.
Well, by 1700s they knew about South America, because I mean Columbus actually in 1492 was actually down there in the islands down there.
Right. Yeah.
And the conquistadors were in South America, Central and South America. Pizarro and Cortez were down there in the 1600s. And
it still was, it looked like it was primitive. But then they had a white ceiling, and on the fresco on the top they had dragons.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We like that. We like the ones with dragons.
In fact, I got another picture from Nuremberg where you have a statue on the armor maker's shop. And it was of St. George and the Dragon. And,
that's the most. It's such a huge legend, and nobody knows. Nobody knows exactly. We always think associated with England, to me.
Right.
But there's stories that are like St. George and the Dragon all over the place.
It's all over the continent, and the Russian Kopeck on the back has St. George and the Dragon.
So where did this legend start from, and who was he?
Right.
I don't know.
And of course, we talked about St. Margaret and the Dragon, and in England, and there's St. Margaret's Church, and she's got her foot on the dragon's head, and that was supposed to be from like the year 300, something like that.
Yeah.
So these.
Is that when Beowulf was was it around the 300s? I know it's before Christianity really got a foothold in England, and so some of it could even be before Christ, but I think it's early AD times. But it's and there are stories of what appear to be dragons or dinosaur type creatures.
Right.
Talked about flying ones, and even Grendel. I think somebody made a case that kind of looked like one of those mini pygmy T-Rexes, kind of a smaller. The arms are small. He was able to get up, but that's a little bit of an aside there. But still, so. This church had pictures of dragons all over it, huh?
Yeah, it did.
Were they winged or not winged?
They were winged.
Okay. Some are and some aren't,
But this was in the Prince Bishop's palace.
Okay.
And so that was a pretty amazing.
What is it? Just a museum now, or what is it now?
Well, it's they give you tours of what it looked like,
Okay.
And it's actually very beautiful in terms of.
So, Doug, what kind of a point we want to take? I mean, we're talking about kind of going all around thing. What was the point that you wanted to?
The point I want to make on this is that bad ideas, bad theology, can create some real nasty problems. You have evolution being a bad idea, and the problems that comes out of that.
Well, yeah, some of the bad things that we keep getting accused of are issues because they had bad biblical understandings of things back in the day. Like the idea that the Earth is flat, and the idea that we're at the center of the unit we actually might be there, but the center of the solar system, and all these kinds of things. But even the idea of spontaneous generation, Doug, which evolution needs.
Right.
They have no proof of it. They have to have spontaneous generation to get God out of the equation totally. Life has to come from non-life at some point. That otherwise you get otherwise you still have the uncaused first cause no matter where you go. But again, the church believed in spontaneous generation. The scripture is very clear. God created everything. Things don't come out of non-life. Only God can do that.
So I guess there's a question that. We need to address, and that how does things of this sort happen? It's because people are not recognizing the Holy Spirit, and they're listening to a different voice, and so they're either listening to their own ideas, or they're listening to the ideas of Satan. You know, obviously this witchcraft stuff just started to, and it generated something that wasn't all that pure. What did it?
No, killing people like that is never. I mean, the scripture is very clear. You know, even when people do evil to you, you don't return evil for evil.
Right.
You know, you basically stop. You don't use a physical sword in the New Testament. You use a sword of the Spirit.
That's right.
You use conversation. The power of the word is strong. That's why I think so many times in our modern day, creationists, and if you will, people who believe in a Judeo-Christian worldview, these people want to muzzle us. They want to shut you up because they're afraid of it. The power of the word is strong. Jesus is called the Word for a reason. He spoke life into existence he spoke it into existence.
Right.
Creation. And we have, in some respects, some relational way, we have the same or similar kind of power. We can speak life to people by speaking the gospel, the word of truth. But again, people want to muzzle it. Now, the devil loves false religion.
Right.
He loves it. He loves bad theology. He loves when people act all too human and they are envious and jealous and spiteful and angry and hateful and murderous. He loves it when people do all those things, especially when they do it through the church.
Yeah.
He loves that because it puts a stench in the nostrils of God, and the world will look at that and you have really no appeal. And you say, well, that's not what Christianity really is. I mean, look, for years and years, many Jewish people associate Adolf Hitler with that's what a Christian was. He was a good son of the church. Adolf Hitler was. He didn't believe in it. He wasn't a Christian by any stretch of the imagination. But the point of it is those kinds of things take a lot to overcome.
Right, they do.
But you can overcome it. Speaking the word of truth speaks life into a thing when it seems like there's only death. Unfortunately, Jesus said, by their fruit you will know them.
Exactly.
What's the fruit of this bad theology? Death.
Death.
What's the fruit of everything that's bad? It's death. It's not life-giving, life-affirming. There's no joy, there's no peace. All you have is angry, misery, and death. That's what you usually have with that kind of stuff.
No, what actually stopped this was that there was empire was actually invaded by Sweden. I think it was the king that...
Were they Protestant trying to come back? Yeah.
And so what happened was that once that took place, and the power of the prince bishops was broken, and then all this witch trial stuff stopped. Now the Austrian Empire, the Franz Joseph, and some of the Habsburgs, they ended all this torture stuff.
Did they? Okay.
And they were actually praying people, from what I understand.
Is that right? I didn't know much about them. The name.
But they ruled Austria for Austrian Empire for 600 years.
A long time. Habsburg's a long. That I didn't know.
I hope you enjoyed our time in a little bit of Europe, but not the witch trials.
Yeah, not the witch trials.
We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.